A poor Omega woman saved a millionaire Alpha King's life, and what he whispered to her in the moments after made her cry for reasons she didn't yet understand. She had spent 10 years invisible. 10 years searching for a sister stolen in the night. 10 years learning that survival meant silence, that safety meant being forgotten, that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. She was a translator who spoke 6 languages but never her own truth. A woman who moved through palaces and slums alike without leaving a trace. She had built her entire existence around one singular mission: find her sister, no matter the cost. And then, in a single heartbeat of impossible choice, she threw it all away. She saved a king she didn't know, a broken man whose wolf had been shattered by rejection, whose wealth couldn't buy him peace, whose court whispered that he was one crisis away from losing control completely. She stopped, the poison meant for his lips. She shattered her own invisibility. She watched her only lead her sister's scent on the wind disappear into the night, because she couldn't let a stranger die. She expected punishment, execution, maybe. Exile at best. Instead, he knelt before her. A king knelt before a nobody, and he whispered 6 words that cracked every wall she'd ever built. Please, please don't leave. She didn't know yet that his wolf had recognized her as mate. She didn't know that the woman who rejected him 5 years ago was watching from the shadows, already plotting to destroy her. She didn't know that saving his life would cost her everything she'd ever searched for and give her everything she'd never dared to want. All she knew was that she was crying, and she couldn't stop. But to understand how a woman who had learned to disappear came to be seen by a king who thought he was beyond saving, we need to go back to where it all started. The border markets smelled like dust and desperation. Liana moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, her braid tight against her skull, her eyes down. She had learned young that survival meant being useful without being seen. A translator. A voice for hire. 6 languages lived on her tongue, but none of them belonged to her. The merchant barely looked at her as he tossed a coin purse onto the table. Northern dialect. He's lying about the grain prices. Find out what he's really asking. She caught the purse without meeting his eyes. Of course. 3 jobs today, 4 yesterday. Enough to keep her fed, sheltered in whatever boarding house would take a lone Omega with no pack, no family, no ties. Enough to keep searching. Always searching. She slipped between market stalls, her wolf pressing restlessly against her thoughts. It had been 9 years since Kira was sold. 9 years since Liana had watched her 8-year-old sister dragged into a carriage bound for a noble house 3 kingdoms away. 9 years of following dead-end leads, interrogating merchants, translating for nobles who might have seen a servant girl with dark hair and storm-gray eyes. Nothing. Every contact led nowhere. Every whisper turned cold. Until today, Liana stopped at a fabric stall, pretending to examine silk while her real attention fixed on the conversation happening 2 stalls over. A merchant from the eastern provinces. His voice carried. Summit at the capital next week. King Ryzen's hosting some diplomatic nonsense with Alpha Dorian's delegation. Big money if you can get close to the negotiations. Her pulse quickened. Alpha Dorian, the northern warlord whose territory included the noble house that had bought Kira all those years ago. The merchant continued. They're hiring translators. Dorian's bringing his full entourage, servants, guards, the whole pack. Liana's fingers tightened on the silk. Servants. She was at the merchant's stall before her conscious mind caught up to her body. The summit. Who's hiring? He looked at her for the first time, his gaze dismissive. Palace steward. But they want experienced. I speak 6 languages fluently. I've translated for merchant lords, treaty negotiations, and border disputes. She kept her voice steady, professional. Invisible, but essential. I can be in the capital in 2 days. The merchant shrugged. Your funeral? King Ryzen's got a reputation. Volatile doesn't begin to cover it. She had heard the stories. The millionaire Alpha King, who the 500th built a fortune from nothing, whose mate had rejected him 5 years ago and left his wolf fractured. Dangerous. Unstable. 1 crisis away from losing control. None of it mattered. If Dorian's servants were coming to the capital, Kira might be among them. Lyanna took the job. 2 days later, she stood at the gates of the Silverpine Palace with a single travel-worn bag and a list of questions rehearsed in 6 languages. The palace rose before her like something out of a dream, white stone and silver banners. Wealth so vast it felt obscene. She had never been anywhere like this. She didn't belong here. But Kira might be inside those walls. The palace steward barely glanced at her credentials before waving her through. You'll translate during the opening banquet tonight. Stay quiet, stay invisible, don't cause trouble. The king's wolf has been unpredictable lately. Lyanna nodded. Invisible was what she did best. She was assigned a servant's room, small, clean, more than she'd had in years. She unpacked her single change of clothes and the worn leather journal where she'd documented every lead, every dead end, every fragment of hope that Kira was still alive. Tonight. The banquet. Dorian's full entourage would be there. Tonight, she might finally see her sister again. She braided her hair tighter, smoothed her plain servant's dress, and made her way toward the banquet hall as the sun began to set. The palace buzzed with preparation. Nobles in silk and jewels, guards in formal armor, the scent of roasted meat and exotic spices thick in the air. And then, as she approached the grand entrance, the wind shifted. Lyanna froze. Her wolf surged forward, suddenly alert. That scent. Faint. Familiar. Impossible. Wild flowers and summer rain, the exact scent Kira had carried as a child. The scent Lyanna had spent 9 years trying to remember without forgetting. She turned toward the courtyard where visiting delegations were assembling their households. Dorian's banners hung from the guest wing. Servants moved in coordinated lines, unloading trunks and preparing for the feast. And there, just for a moment, a girl with dark hair turned her head. Lyanna's breath stopped. Kira. The banquet hall blazed with 1,000 candles. Lyanna stood at the servants' station along the eastern wall, positioned between the kitchen entrance and the translator's alcove where she could hear every word spoken at the high table. The air hung thick with roasted meat, spiced wine, and the competing scents of 100 noble wolves marking their territory through sheer presence. She kept her eyes down. Her job was simple. Translate the formal greetings between King Rysand and Alpha Dorian, facilitate the diplomatic niceties that would prevent 2 kingdoms from going to war. Stay invisible. But her wolf would not be still. Kira's scent lingered somewhere in this hall. Close. So close, Lyanna could taste wildflowers on her tongue. The visiting delegation sat at the left side of the high table. Alpha Dorian, a broad figure draped in furs despite the warmth. His servant stood behind him in neat rows, silent and efficient. Lyanna's gaze swept across them, searching for dark hair, storm-gray eyes, a face she'd memorized from a 9-year-old memory. There. 3rd row. A girl with her back turned, braided hair pinned tight. Lyanna's breath caught. At the center of the high table, King Rysand rose to offer the ceremonial toast. She should have been watching him, translating his words into the northern dialect Dorian's court would understand. But all she could see was that girl's shoulder, the particular slope of it, the way she held herself small. Kira. It had to be Kira. The palace steward cleared his throat. Right, the toast. Lyanna forced her attention back to the high table just as Rysand lifted his goblet. And that's when she saw it. Dorian's cupbearer, young, nervous, hands too quick, reached forward during a orchestrated distraction, a servant dropping a platter 2 seats down, eyes turning. The cupbearer switched Rysand's wineglass for an identical one from his tray. Lyanna knew that move. She'd seen it in border taverns and merchant halls, in deals that ended with bodies carried out the back door. The poison switch. Identical glasses, identical wine, one laced with something that would kill before the victim hit the floor. Her wolf snarled. Danger. Rysand raised the glass to his lips. Time fractured. Lyanna saw 2 paths with perfect clarity. Stay silent, let the king drink, use the chaos to reach Kira. Or stop this, expose herself, and watch her sister disappear. Every instinct screamed to choose Kira. 10 years of searching, 10 years of dead ends and broken leads. Her sister was 20 feet away, but she couldn't. She couldn't watch a man die when she had the power to stop it. She couldn't be the person who turned away when someone needed help. Not again. Not ever. Liana ran. She shoved past the servants' station, vaulted over the low barrier separating the high table from the rest of the hall, and crashed into the king just as the glass touched his lips. The impact sent them both stumbling. The goblet flew from his hand, spinning through candlelight before shattering against marble. Silence. The wine hissed where it struck the floor. Black smoke rose from the stone as the liquid ate through marble like acid, leaving corroded scars in its wake. Poison. Then chaos erupted. Guards seized Liana from both sides, hauling her back from the king. Dorian surged to his feet, roaring accusations in the northern dialect. Nobles scattered, servants screamed, and Rysand Liana felt him before she saw him. A presence that slammed into her senses like a physical blow. Her wolf went absolutely still, every instinct locking onto the man standing 3 feet away. He was tall, broad-shouldered, built like violence wrapped in expensive silk. Black hair fell across amber gold eyes that burned with something between rage and confusion. His hands scarred knuckles. Elegant fingers were clenched at his sides as if fighting to maintain control. She could smell his wolf. Wild and broken, all jagged edges and volcanic fury barely contained beneath skin. And then his scent changed. The rage smoothed. The chaos quieted. His wolf went utterly, impossibly still for the first time in how long had it been since he'd felt peace. Ryzen's gaze locked on Liana. She watched something shift in those amber eyes. Recognition without understanding. His wolf knew something his conscious mind hadn't caught up to yet. Across the room, Chancellor Maris stood frozen among the crowd of nobles, ice-blonde hair perfectly styled, her expression a careful mask of concern. But Liana caught the flash of something else beneath it. Alarm. Calculation. Fear. The guard's grip tightened on Liana's arms. Dorian was demanding her execution, his voice carrying across the hall in 3 languages. His servants were already moving, gathering their things with the efficiency of a planned exit. No. Liana's gaze snapped to the delegation. The girl with the braided hair was being ushered toward the door with the rest of them. She never turned, never looked back. Kira. Stop. Rysand's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The room went silent. The guards holding Liana hesitated. Dorian stopped mid-sentence. Every eye in the hall turned to the king. Rysand took a step closer. His scent wrapped around Liana pine and smoke and something darker, something that made her wolf whine with recognition. Release her, he said quietly. The guards obeyed. Dorian's face purpled with rage. She disrupted a diplomatic summit. She could have been attempting assassination herself. She saved my life. Ryzen's gaze never left Liana's face. The wine was poisoned. Look at the floor. Nobles craned to see the corroded marble. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Dorian's expression shuddered. Then someone in my delegation is a traitor. I will not stay where my people are accused of such things. He gestured sharply to his servants. We leave now. Alpha Dorian. Ryzen began, but the Northern Alpha was already moving, his entire entourage flowing toward the exit like a military retreat. Liana watched Kira disappear through the doors. Gone. Just like that. 10 years of searching. 1 moment of choice. And her sister was gone again, swallowed by a delegation that would scatter across 3 kingdoms before dawn. She'd saved a king and lost everything. The hall emptied slowly, nobles retreating to their quarters, guards securing the poisoned wine as evidence, servants cleaning shattered glass. Liana stood in the center of it all, small and exposed and utterly visible for the first time in a decade. Rysand moved. She expected him to stand, to tower over her, to use his authority to demand answers. Instead, he knelt. A king, kneeling before an omega in servant's clothes. I have spent 5 years wanting to die, he whispered, his voice so raw it hurt to hear. "You are the first person who made me want to live." His amber eyes held hers, broken and desperate and somehow, impossibly, at peace. "Please," he said. "Please don't leave." And Liana, who had learned never to cry because tears were a luxury she couldn't afford, felt something crack inside her chest. The guards escorted Liana through silent corridors, their boots echoing against marble. She kept her eyes forward, her breathing steady, even as her mind screamed at her to run. She'd just saved a king's life and lost her sister in the same breath. They stopped at a heavy wooden door. One guard knocked twice before stepping aside. The door opened to reveal a private study, all dark wood and firelight, leather-bound books lining the walls. King Rysand stood by the window, his back to the door. He didn't turn when she entered. The guards closed the door behind her. The click of the lock felt final. Liana stood in the center of the room and waited. She'd learned patience young. How to make herself small, how to survive. Why? Rysand's voice was quiet, rougher than it had been in the banquet hall. She took a breath. "Why what, Your Majesty? Why did you save me?" He turned then, and the firelight caught the sharp angles of his face. He looked exhausted. "You don't know me. You had no reason to risk yourself. I saw the poison switch. I couldn't just—" She stopped, found the truth beneath the practiced answer. "I couldn't watch you die when I had the power to stop it, even though it cost you everything." Her throat tightened. "Yes." Rysand moved closer, each step measured. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that his scent wrapped around her again. Pine and smoke, and that darker note her wolf recognized. Not now. She couldn't think about what her wolf wanted. Not when Kira was— "What was her name?" he asked. "The girl you were looking for." "Kira, my sister." The words came easier than they should have. "She was sold 9 years ago. I've been searching ever since." "And you thought she was in Dorian's entourage?" "I caught her scent. I saw her." Liana's hands clenched at her sides. She was right there. The king studied her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression, understanding maybe, or recognition. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to understand what it means." Liana waited. "5 years ago, my fated mate rejected our bond." His voice stayed level, but she heard the fracture underneath. "Publicly, in front of the entire court, she chose a political alliance over me." Her wolf whined softly. Pain. She knew that pain. "The rejection should have killed me," Rysand continued. "Most wolves don't survive when their mate severs the bond. But I lived. And my wolf?" He paused, his jaw tight. "My wolf broke instead. Fractured, volatile. I've spent 5 years one bad day away from losing control completely. My court watches me like I'm a bomb waiting to explode. They're not wrong." He took another step closer. Liana's pulse quickened. "But tonight, when you touched me, when you crashed into me to save my life," my wolf went quiet for the first time in half a decade. His amber eyes held hers. "I don't know why. I don't know what you did. But for the first time in 5 years, I felt peace." Liana's breath caught. She knew what he was saying, what his wolf had recognized. Mate T, no, she couldn't afford this, couldn't afford him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "But I'm not. I can't. I'm not asking you to fix me." Rysand's voice gentled. "I'm offering you a deal." She blinked. "What kind of deal?" "Stay in the palace, as my personal interpreter." He gestured toward the study's desk, where maps and documents lay scattered. "I have resources you don't. Investigators. Contacts across 7 kingdoms. If your sister is alive, I can find her." Hope flared hot and desperate in her chest. "Why would you do that?" "Because you saved my life. And because—" He hesitated, then said it anyway. "Because my wolf is calm when you're near. I don't understand it. But I'm not fool enough to let you walk away. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't a confession, it was a transaction, survival for survival, need for need. It was exactly the kind of deal Liana understood. And if I say yes?" she asked. What do you get? You stay close. You let me use your presence to keep my wolf stable while we find your sister. His gaze never wavered. That's all I'm asking. Liana searched his face for the lie, for the trap. But all she found was exhaustion and a desperate kind of honesty that matched her own. She should say no. She should leave this palace and search for Kira herself, the way she'd been doing for 9 years. Alone, safe. But alone hadn't worked. And Saith hadn't found her sister. I'll stay, she said. But only until Kira is found. Then, I'm gone. Something flickered in Ryzen's expression. Relief, maybe. Or something more complicated. Agreed. He moved to the desk and pulled out parchment, writing quickly. I'll have quarters prepared for you. You'll have access to my investigators' reports. Anything you need. Liana nodded, still trying to process what she'd just agreed to. As Rysand finished writing, she found herself asking the question she shouldn't. Your mate, the one who rejected you. She paused. Why did she do it? Rysand's hand stilled on the parchment. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, quiet and raw, because I wasn't enough. The words hung in the air between them. Liana felt them settle in her chest like stones because she knew that feeling too. The bone-deep certainty that you would never be enough for anyone to choose you, to keep you, to stay. Her wolf pressed against her thoughts, whispering something she refused to hear. Mate. She ignored it. Rysand handed her the orders he'd written, instructions for the palace steward to prepare rooms, grant her access, treat her as part of his household. His fingers brushed hers as she took the parchment. Brief, accidental, electric. He pulled back immediately, and Liana saw the same awareness in his eyes that she felt thrumming under her skin. I'll show you to your quarters, he said, his voice carefully neutral. They walked through the palace in silence, the space between them charged with everything they weren't saying. When they reached a door in the eastern wing, Rysand stopped. These rooms are yours. If you need anything. I won't, Liana said quickly. He studied her for a moment. You're afraid of needing things. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer. Rysand stepped back, giving her space. Good night, Liana. It was the first time he'd used her name. The sound of it in his voice made her wolf stir again, restless and wanting. Good night, Your Majesty. She slipped into the rooms and closed the door before he could see her hand shaking. The quarters were beautiful. A sitting room, a bedroom, luxury she'd never experienced. Liana stood in the center of it all and felt the walls closing in. She'd just made a deal with a king whose wolf had claimed her. A king who was one crisis away from losing control. A king whose broken matched her own so perfectly it terrified her. And somewhere out there, Kira was still lost. Liana sank onto the edge of the bed and stared at her calloused hands. She had no idea how to survive this. The first week passed in a blur of translation and proximity. Liana shadowed Rysand through council meetings, trade negotiations, and diplomatic correspondence. She stood 3 steps behind him during public appearances, translating the northern dialects and eastern tongues his advisors couldn't speak. She made herself useful. Essential. Invisible, except to him. The change in the king was impossible to miss. Where before his court had walked on eggshells, bracing for the next volcanic outburst, now they moved with cautious relief. Rysand's decisions came faster, sharper. His temper stayed even. His wolf, which had been a constant threat lurking beneath his skin, seemed to settle whenever Liana entered a room. The nobles noticed. They whispered behind hands and fans, their eyes tracking her every movement. And Chancellor Maris noticed most of all. She appeared at every meeting, perfectly poised in ice blue silk, her blonde hair arranged in elaborate braids. She positioned herself at Rysand's right hand, offering counsel and a voice smooth as honey. She referenced their shared history with casual intimacy. Remember when you always said, the way we used to. Rysand was polite, distant, his responses clipped and professional. But Maris's gaze kept sliding to Liana with something cold and calculating behind the courtly smile. On the 4th day, Rysand's head investigator delivered his report in the king's private office. Liana stood by the window, pretending not to listen. Dorian's delegation scattered immediately after the summit, the investigator said. Servants dispersed across 3 kingdoms. We're tracking movement, but finding one specific individual will take time. Liana's fingers tightened on the window frame. Time. Always time. 9 years hadn't been enough. How much longer? Keep searching, Rhysand said. I want weekly reports. Of course, Your Majesty. After the investigator left, silence settled heavy between them. Liana felt Rhysand's attention on her back like a physical weight. She's alive, he said quietly. We'll find her. Liana didn't turn. You don't know that. I know you wouldn't have spent 10 years searching if you didn't believe it. The certainty in his voice made her chest ache. That evening, during a council session on grain tariffs, Maris leaned close to Rhysand and murmured something Liana couldn't hear. Her hand rested briefly on his sleeve, casual, familiar, possessive. Rhysand shifted away, subtle but deliberate. Maris's smile tightened. The days bled into each other. Liana learned the rhythms of palace life, the intricate dance of power and protocol. She translated during negotiations where fortunes changed hands with a single word. She stood silent in throne room audiences where Rhysand dispensed justice with measured fairness. And through it all, she felt his awareness of her like a constant hum beneath her skin. He started asking questions, small ones at first, woven into the spaces between official duties. Where did you learn Valfic? It's not commonly taught in the border villages. A merchant caravan passed through when I was 12. I traded work for lessons. And the others? Necessity. You learn fast when your survival depends on being useful. His jaw tightened at that, but he didn't push. Another day, another question. You said you've been alone since Kira was sold. No pack, no family, no one. That must have been hard. Liana shrugged, keeping her eyes on the trade documents she was reviewing. You survive. You adapt. You don't let yourself need anything. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer. The week's 5th evening found them in the council chamber after everyone else had left. Lanterns cast warm light across maps and ledgers. Liana was translating a disputed contract when Rhysand's voice cut through her concentration. Why have you never bonded? Her hand stilled on the parchment. That's personal, Your Majesty. So was telling you about my mate's rejection. I thought we'd moved past titles in private. Liana looked up. He was watching her with those amber eyes, patient and unrelenting. I've never met anyone I wanted to bond with, she said carefully, or anyone you'd let yourself want. The truth of it hit too close. She stood, gathering the documents. It's late. I should. His hand caught her wrist, not hard, not commanding, just enough to stop her from running. The touch sent heat racing up her arm. Her wolf surged forward, straining toward him, and she had to fight to keep her breathing steady. Rhysand stood slowly, still holding her wrist. The space between them felt charged, dangerous. You're afraid of me, he said. No. The word came out too fast. Then what? Liana met his gaze and let him see the truth. I'm afraid of needing you. The confession hung between them. Rhysand's thumb brushed across her pulse point, deliberate this time, testing. Her heartbeat kicked up, and she knew he could feel it. Why? His voice had gone soft, intimate. Because needing people means they can leave, and I've spent 10 years learning how to survive alone. You don't have to. Yes, I do. She pulled against his grip, not hard enough to break free, just enough to make her point. This is temporary, a deal. When we find Kira, I'm gone. Something flickered in his expression. Pain, maybe, or understanding. And if I don't want you to go? Her wolf howled. Mate. Stay. Hours. Liana forced the words out anyway. It doesn't matter what you want. It doesn't matter what She stopped, the almost confession catching in her throat. Rhysand's gaze dropped to her lips, lingered there. The air between them went tight with want and restraint. He could kiss her. She knew he wanted to. She could see it in the tension of his jaw, the careful control in every line of his body. But he didn't. Instead, he released her wrist and stepped back, putting space between them that felt like a chasm. Then I'll prove I'm worth the risk. The palace gardens blazed with lanterns for the harvest festival. Liana stood at the edge of the celebration, translating pleasantries between visiting merchants, while the court danced and drank under strings of golden light. Music drifted through the warm evening air, mingling with laughter and the scent of honeyed wine. She'd been in the palace for 3 weeks now, 3 weeks of proximity and restraint, 3 weeks of watching Rysand prove himself worth the risk in 1,000 small ways she couldn't let herself acknowledge. Rysand appeared at her elbow, his presence making her wolf leap to attention. "Come with me," he said quietly. "I have news." Her pulse jumped. News meant the investigators. News meant... She followed him away from the celebration, through moonlit paths until the music faded to a distant hum. They stopped beside a fountain, water trickling over stone, the garden empty except for them. Rysand turned to face her. His expression was careful, controlled, but she could smell hope on him, bright and dangerous. "My investigators found her." Liana's knees went weak. "Kira. Alive. Working in a noble estate 2 days' ride east." He stepped closer, his voice gentle. "I'm sending an envoy tomorrow to retrieve her. She'll be here within the week." The world tilted. 10 years. 10 years of searching, scraping, surviving alone. And now Liana's breath came in sharp gasps. Relief crashed through her so hard she couldn't stand. Her legs gave out. Rysand caught her before she hit the ground, his arms wrapping around her as she collapsed against his chest. She should pull away. She should maintain distance. But she couldn't make herself move. "Easy," he murmured. "I've got you." And he did. His hands were steady on her back, his heartbeat strong beneath her cheek. He held her like she was something precious instead of something broken. "Thank you," Liana whispered. "Thank you, She couldn't finish. The words tangled in her throat. Rysand's hand came up to cup the back of her head, his fingers threading through her braid. "You don't owe me thanks. You saved my life, remember?" "This is different." "No, it's the same." His voice went rough. "You gave me a reason to keep breathing. Let me give you yours back." Liana pulled back just enough to look at him. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, the amber of his eyes. He was looking at her like she mattered, like she was more than useful, like she was wanted. "Walk with me," he said. They moved deeper into the gardens, away from the festival lights. The path wound between hedges and flowering vines, the air thick with jasmine and night-blooming roses. Neither of them spoke. The silence felt fragile, like the moment before lightning strikes. Rysand broke it first. "I haven't felt this stable in 5 years." His hands were in his pockets, his shoulders tense. "Before you, I was, existing, going through the motions. I'd convinced myself that broken was permanent, that peace wasn't something I deserved." Liana's throat tightened. "I was ready to give up," he continued. "Not dramatically, just quietly. Let the wolf win eventually. Stop fighting." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "And then you crashed into me and saved my life, and for the first time in half a decade, my wolf went quiet. Rysand, I need you to know that before I..." He took a breath. "I need you to know you changed everything." Liana looked up at him, her wolf pressing hard against her thoughts. "Mate, ours, stay. I've never had anyone care whether I lived or died," she said, the confession slipping out before she could stop it. "Not since Kira. I've been alone so long I forgot what it felt like to matter to someone." His jaw tightened. "You matter to me." The air between them went electric. Rysand lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to step back, to refuse. His fingers brushed her cheek, then cupped her face with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "Can I kiss you?" His voice had gone soft, uncertain, vulnerable. "Please." Liana's heart hammered. She should say no. She should protect herself. She should... Yes. He closed the distance between them with careful slowness, like he was afraid she'd disappear. His other hand came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. He was giving her time to change her mind, to run, to choose safety over this. Liana didn't run. His lips touched hers, soft and testing. A question. She answered by leaning into him, her hands finding his chest for balance. The kiss deepened, slow and desperate and utterly shattering. Her wolf screamed. Mate. Mine. Ours. His scent wrapped around her pine and smoke, and something wild that made her want to crawl inside his skin and never leave. She could feel his heartbeat through her palms, rapid and strong. Could taste the wanting on his lips. Ryzan's arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer. One hand slid into her hair, loosening her braid. The kiss turned hungry, urgent. 10 years of loneliness met 5 years of brokenness, and for a perfect, impossible moment, they weren't alone anymore. His wolf roared, ours, claim, keep. Ryzan pulled back, breathless. His forehead rested against hers, his eyes closed, his whole body trembling with restraint. I want to claim you, he whispered. Right now. I want to bite down and make you mine and never let you go. Liana's breath hitched. She could feel his wolf straining toward her, could smell the desperate need coming off him in waves. But I need you to choose it freely, he continued, his voice raw. Not because you're grateful, not because you owe me, because you want this, want me. Terror and longing warred in her chest. She wanted him. She wanted this. She wanted to stop running and let herself have something good for once in her life. But wanting and keeping were different things. Wanting and deserving were oceans apart. I can't, Liana whispered. Not yet. The words tasted like ash. Ryzan went very still. Then he nodded once and stepped back, putting careful distance between them. His expression was controlled, but she could see the hurt underneath. Okay, he said quietly, when you're ready. If you're ever ready, I'll wait. He walked her back to the palace in silence. When they reached her door, he pressed a kiss to her forehead, chaste and aching, and left without another word. Liana closed the door and slid down to the floor, her fingers touching her lips where she could still feel him. She was falling in love with a king she couldn't afford to keep. 2 days passed with no word from the envoy. Liana tried not to let panic show. She stood beside Ryzan during council meetings, translated trade agreements, maintained her composure. But her wolf paced restlessly beneath her skin, sensing something wrong. The summons came on the 3rd morning. A servant appeared at her door with a note written in elegant script. Chancellor Maris requests your presence in her private study. A matter regarding the king's protection. Liana's stomach tightened. She'd been avoiding Maris since the night of the kiss, unwilling to endure the woman's cold stares and calculated smiles. But refusing a direct summons would be noticed. She went. Maris's study smelled of lavender and old parchment. The chancellor sat behind a carved desk, her ice-blonde hair perfectly arranged, her expression polite and pleasant. Please sit. Maris gestured to a chair. I thought it was time we spoke privately. Liana remained standing. About what? About the king's welfare. And yours. Maris folded her hands on the desk. You care for him, don't you? The question felt like a trap. I'm his interpreter. You're his mate. Maris's smile sharpened. His wolf has claimed you. Anyone with eyes can see it. The court whispers about nothing else. Liana's pulse quickened. I don't know what you... Don't insult us both with lies. Maris stood and moved to the window. I rejected Ryzan 5 years ago to secure a political alliance. It was the practical choice. The smart choice. I watched him break and told myself it was necessary. She turned, and for the first time, Liana saw something raw beneath the polished exterior. I was wrong. Silence settled between them. I have spent 5 years regretting that choice, Maris continued. 5 years watching the man I was meant to bond with suffer because I chose power over love. And now you, a nobody, Omega with nothing to offer, have somehow healed what I broke. Liana's wolf bristled. Danger. I won't allow it. Maris walked to her desk and pulled out a letter. She placed it on the surface between them. Your sister, Kira, 17 years old, dark hair, gray eyes, currently residing at my private estate 30 miles east of the capital. The world tilted. Liana lunged for the letter, but Maris's hand got there first. "I've had her for months," Maris said calmly. "Alpha Dorian was my ally. The entire summit was orchestrated to either eliminate Rysand or position me as his savior. Your interference was unexpected, but when I learned you had a sister, I saw an opportunity." Liana couldn't breathe. "You're lying." Maris turned the letter around. Liana saw handwriting she hadn't seen in 9 years. Childish loops now replaced with elegant script, but unmistakably Kira's. "She's alive. She's safe. And she can stay that way." Maris's voice went cold. "If you disappear." "What?" "Leave the palace, tonight. No goodbye, no explanation. Just vanish the way you appeared." Maris leaned forward. "Do that, and Kira will be released within a week. Stay, and I will ensure she suffers for your selfishness." Liana's hands shook. "Why are you doing this?" "Because Rysand was mine first. Because I made a mistake I've spent 5 years paying for. Because I will not watch an invisible nothing take what should have been mine." Maris's mask cracked, showing the desperate obsession beneath. "His wolf only quieted because you were there. Remove yourself, and he'll need me again. The way he used to. He doesn't want you. He will. When you're gone and the pain returns, he'll remember that I understand him, that we share history, that I'm the only one who knows what it's like to be broken by rejection." Maris straightened. "You have until dawn. Choose your sister, or choose a bond that was never meant to be yours." The letter sat on the desk between them, proof that Kira was alive, that 9 years of searching had led here, to this impossible choice. "If I leave," Liana whispered, "how do I know you'll keep your word?" "You don't. But you know what happens if you stay." Liana took the letter. Her sister's handwriting blurred through tears she wouldn't let fall. She left Maris's study and walked through the palace like a ghost. Servants moved past her unseeing. Guards nodded without recognition, invisible again, the way she'd always been. Except to him. Liana made it to her rooms before her legs gave out. She sank onto the floor, the letter clutched in her hands, and let herself break. 10 years. 10 years of searching. And now Kira was 30 miles away, alive and waiting. All Liana had to do was leave. Leave Rysand. Leave the bond her wolf screamed for. Leave the first person who'd ever looked at her and seen something worth keeping. She opened the letter with shaking hands. "Liana, if you're reading this, I'm okay. I miss you. I hope you're safe." Kira, 9 words. 9 words that proved her sister was alive. Liana looked around the room Rysand had given her. Beautiful and temporary, like everything else in her life. She'd known this couldn't last. She'd told him from the beginning, when Kira was found, she'd leave. She just hadn't expected it to destroy her. Her bag was still unpacked. She'd never truly settled, never let herself believe she could stay. Liana put her few belongings inside with mechanical precision. A change of clothes. The worn journal. The letter. No note. What could she say that wouldn't be a lie? "Thank you for finding her. I'm sorry I'm leaving. I wish I was brave enough to choose you. All true, all impossible to write." The palace was silent in the hours before dawn. Liana slipped through corridors she'd memorized, past guards who'd grown used to her presence. No one stopped her. No one noticed. She was invisible again. The eastern gate stood open for early market traffic. Liana walked through it and didn't look back. Behind her, in the king's chambers, Rysand woke to sunlight and reached for the bond he'd felt humming between them for 3 weeks. It was still there. But she was gone. His wolf began to scream. Kira heard the servants talking in the kitchen 3 days after she'd been moved to the estate. "The translator left," one whispered. "Just disappeared without a word." "To save her sister, I heard. Chancellor Maris gave her an ultimatum." Kira's hands stilled on the dishes she was washing. "Sister." Translator left Liana. She'd known her sister was searching. For 9 years, Kira had held onto that knowledge like a lifeline, believing that somewhere out there, Liana hadn't forgotten her. But she'd never imagined this, that Liana had found her, had been so close, and had sacrificed everything to keep her safe. Rage burned through Kira's chest, hot and righteous. She was 17 now, not the helpless 8-year-old who'd been dragged into a carriage and sold. She'd learned to survive in the houses that had passed her between them like property. She'd learned to fight, to plan, to wait for the right moment. This was the right moment. That night, Kira slipped out through the kitchen entrance while the estate guards changed shifts. She'd mapped their patterns for months, waiting for an opportunity she'd never thought would come. Now she ran through the darkness, her wolf pushing her faster, stronger. The capital was 30 miles away. She didn't stop running. In the palace, the king was dying. Not physically, but every member of the court could see it happening, could smell the instability rolling off Rysand in waves, could hear his wolf howling just beneath his skin. 3 days since the translator had vanished. 3 days of watching their king unravel. Captain Aldrich stood guard outside the council chamber, his jaw tight. He'd served Rysand for 15 years. He'd watched the mate rejection nearly kill him 5 years ago. He'd seen the slow deterioration since. But he'd also seen the peace that had settled over the king when the Omega arrived. The calm. The hope. And now she was gone, and Rysand was worse than before because now he knew what he'd lost. Inside the chamber, Maris positioned herself at Rysand's side with practiced grace. "You should eat something," she murmured. "You haven't touched food in 2 days." Rysand didn't respond. He sat at the head of the table, his hands clenched, his eyes distant. His wolf raged inside him, tearing at his control with claws made of grief and betrayal. "She was using you," Maris continued, her voice gentle and poisonous. "I tried to warn you, but you wouldn't listen. Some Omegas are opportunistic. They see a vulnerable alpha and stop talking." Maris fell silent, but satisfaction flickered across her face before she could hide it. Across the room, Elder Miriam watched the Chancellor with narrowed eyes. Something was wrong. The timing was too convenient. The translator's disappearance too complete. The doors burst open. A girl stumbled through 17, dark hair wild, eyes storm gray and blazing with fury. Guards rushed to seize her, but she shook them off with surprising strength. "I need to see the king," she said. "Now." Rysand's head lifted, his wolf focused with predatory intensity. "Who are you, Kira, Liana's sister?" She stepped forward, ignoring the guards. "And I know what Chancellor Maris did." Maris went very still. Kira's gaze locked on the woman who'd held her captive. "She blackmailed my sister, told her to leave or I'd suffer. Liana gave up everything to save me, and I'm not going to let her sacrifice mean nothing." The council chamber erupted, advisors shouting questions, guards moving toward Maris, the Chancellor backing away with carefully constructed shock on her face. Rysand stood. The room went silent. He moved around the table with dangerous calm, stopping directly in front of Kira. Up close, she could see the resemblance to her sister, the gray eyes, the set of her jaw. But where Liana had learned to make herself small, this girl burned with defiance. "Tell me everything," he said. Kira did. The estate, the servants' gossip, Maris's threats, the trade, Liana's freedom for Kira's safety. "She didn't want to leave you," Kira said, her voice breaking. "I heard what the servant said. She fell in love with you. But she couldn't choose you over me. She spent 10 years searching, and Her hands clenched. "I won't let her throw her life away for mine." Rysand's wolf went absolutely still, focused. For the first time in 3 days, purpose cut through the grief. "Where is she?" "Maris's estate, 30 miles east." Kira met his gaze without flinching. "She thinks she's protecting me. She doesn't know I'm here." Rysand turned to Captain Aldrich. "Ready my horse. A full guard unit." "Your Majesty," Maris began. "You're confined to quarters pending investigation," Rysand said, his voice flat and lethal. "If you've orchestrated any of this, if you've touched my mate, there isn't a kingdom far enough to hide you." Maris's mask finally cracked, showing the desperation beneath. She's not your mate. I am. We were meant. You rejected me. Ryzen's wolf pushed into his voice, making it resonate with alpha command. You made your choice 5 years ago. You don't get to unmake it now. Guards took Maris by the arms. She didn't fight, but her gaze stayed locked on Ryzen with something between longing and hatred. I only wanted you back, she whispered. He never had me, not the way she does. Maris was led away. The council dissolved into chaos, advisors demanding explanations, guards securing the chamber. Ryzen ignored all of it. He looked at Kira. Can you ride? She straightened. Yes, then you're coming with me. 10 minutes later, they rode out through the palace gates, Ryzen, Kira, and 6 royal guards. The horses moved at a gallop through the darkness, hoofbeats thundering against packed earth. Ryzen's wolf strained toward the bond, following the pull that had never broken despite the distance. She was out there, alive, waiting, and he was going to bring her home. Dawn broke gray and cold over Maris's estate. Liana sat in the locked guest room where she'd spent 3 days, her arms wrapped around her knees, her wolf silent and grieving. She'd made her choice. Kira would be free. That was enough. That had to be enough. The sound of hoofbeats shattered the morning silence. Liana's head snapped up. She moved to the window, her pulse racing. Horses. Guards. And 2 figures in the lead. Her breath stopped. Ryzen. His scent hit her even through the glass, pine and smoke and desperation. Her wolf surged forward with a keening cry. Mate. Ours. Home. No. He shouldn't be here. Maris would. The door downstairs crashed open. Liana heard Maris's voice, smooth and practiced. Your Majesty, what an unexpected. Where is she? Risan's voice cut through the estate like a blade. I'm afraid I don't know who you. Liana? Where is Liana? A pause, then Maris recalibrating. Ah, yes. The translator. She came to me seeking protection, actually. From court politics, I've been sheltering her here as a kindness. You're lying. Footsteps on the stairs. Rabid, purposeful. Liana scrambled back from the door as the lock rattled. It burst open. Ryzen stood in the doorway, his hair windswept, his eyes wild, his whole body vibrating with barely contained violence. His wolf blazed in his gaze, feral, possessive, relieved. Behind him, Kira appeared. Alive. Fierce. Free. Liana couldn't process it, couldn't understand how Liana. Razan's voice broke on her name. She stood frozen, prepared for anger, for commands, for rejection. She'd left him. She'd chosen Kira over the bond. She'd what do you need? The question shattered her. Not what did you do, not why did you leave, not how could you. What do you need? Liana's walls crumbled. I need help, she whispered. I need you. I need to stop running. Ryzen crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against his chest, her hands fisting in his shirt, her wolf finally settling. I've got you, he murmured against her hair. I've got you. Kira launched herself at Liana from behind, wrapping her arms around her sister. You idiot, Kira said, her voice thick with tears. I'm not 8 years old anymore. I don't need you to sacrifice everything for me. Liana pulled back enough to look at her sister. Really look. Kira was 17, sharp-eyed and strong, no longer the child she'd been carrying in her memory for 9 years. I was so scared, Liana said. I thought if I stayed, Maris would hurt you. She tried. Kira's smile turned fierce. I escaped. And I told him everything. Razan's arms tightened around Liana. Maris blackmailed you, used your sister as leverage, and you left to protect her. It wasn't a question, but Liana nodded anyway. You should have told me. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't. Her voice cracked. I spent 10 years searching for her. I couldn't choose you over her. I couldn't. I know. Ryzen cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. I know, and I don't blame you. But you're not alone anymore. You don't have to choose. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Maris appeared in the doorway, guards flanking her, her expression perfectly composed. "Your Majesty, there seems to be a misunderstanding." "Captain Aldrich," Rhysand said without looking away from Lyanna. "Search the Chancellor's study. I want every document, every letter, every piece of correspondence." The guard captain moved past Maris. She stepped aside with a tight smile. "You won't find anything incriminating. I assure you." "We found the letter to Alpha Dorian," Kira said. "The one confirming the assassination plot. It was in your desk." Maris's mask slipped. Just for a second, the guards returned with armfuls of parchment. Aldrich scanned the top letter, his expression darkening. "Your Majesty, this is extensive. Correspondence with Dorian, plans for the summit, payment records for the cupbearer who switched the wine glasses." The room went silent. Maris straightened her shoulders. "I only wanted to protect the kingdom. Rhysand was unstable, dangerous. I was ensuring proper succession in case you tried to kill me." Rhysand's voice went flat and cold. "You orchestrated an assassination attempt. You blackmailed my mate. You held an innocent girl hostage. She's not your mate, I am." "No." Rhysand stepped away from Lyanna just enough to face Maris fully. "You were. 5 years ago, you were my mate, and you rejected the bond. You made your choice. I made a mistake. And you've spent 5 years compounding it." His wolf pushed into his voice, making it resonate with command. "You don't get to decide you want me back now. You don't get to hurt the people I love to clear your path. You had me, Maris. You threw me away. You don't get a second chance to break me." Maris's composure finally shattered. "I only wanted you back," she whispered. "Everything I did it was to get you back. By trying to kill me, you weren't supposed to die. You were supposed to need me." Her voice rose, desperate and furious. "You were supposed to remember that I understood you, that we belonged together." But then Maris's gaze locked on Lyanna with pure hatred, an invisible nothing, and somehow she healed what I broke. She didn't heal me. Rhysand moved back to Lyanna's side. "She gave me a reason to heal myself." Guards took Maris by the arms. She didn't fight, but her eyes stayed locked on Rhysand with devastating longing. "You'll regret this," she said. "The only thing I regret is not seeing you clearly 5 years ago." They led Maris away. Her protests echoed through the estate until distance swallowed them. Rhysand turned back to Lyanna. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "Let's go home." The word hit her like a physical blow. Home. She'd never had one, never stayed anywhere long enough to call it that. "The palace isn't. Home is wherever you are," Rhysand said quietly. "It took losing you to understand that." Lyanna looked at Kira, who nodded encouragement. Looked at Rhysand, whose wolf was finally completely calm. Looked at the guards who waited patiently, who'd ridden through the night to find her. She wasn't invisible anymore. Wasn't alone. Wasn't running. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's go home." They rode back to the palace as the sun rose. Lyanna on Rhysand's horse with his arms around her, Kira riding beside them with Captain Aldrich, the bond humming between them like a promise waiting to be kept. The throne room blazed with afternoon light. Lyanna stood beside Rhysand at the base of the dais, her hand in his as the full court assembled. Nobles in silk and jewels, advisors in formal robes, guards in ceremonial armor. Every eye in the kingdom fixed on the invisible Omega who had somehow captured their king. Maris stood in chains before the throne, her perfect composure finally shattered. Rhysand's voice carried through the vast hall, formal and absolute. "Chancellor Maris Thorne, you are charged with conspiracy to commit murder, blackmail, and treason against the crown. The evidence is extensive. The verdict is clear." Maris lifted her chin. "I did it for you. Everything I did, you tried to kill me. I wanted you to need me again." "I never needed you," Rhysand said quietly. "I loved you. There's a difference. And you chose power over that love. You don't get to rewrite history now." The court held its breath. "You are stripped of your title and lands. You will be exiled beyond our borders by sunset. If you return, the sentence is death." Guards led Maris away. She didn't fight, didn't scream. She just looked at Rysand with devastating regret until the doors closed behind her. Silence settled over the throne room. Rysand turned to face the assembled court, Lyanna's hand still clasped in his. "I called this assembly for a second reason," he said. "I have found my true mate." Whispers erupted. Nobles craned to see who he meant. Rysand pulled Lyanna forward gently, positioning her at his side where everyone could see. "4 weeks ago, this woman saved my life. She stopped an assassination attempt at great personal cost. She asked for nothing in return. And in the weeks since, she has given me something I thought I'd lost forever: peace." Lyanna's pulse hammered. Every eye in the room was on her. Judging. Questioning. "Her name is Lyanna," Rysand continued. "She is an Omega from the border villages. A translator. She has no title, no lands, no political connections to offer." His hand tightened on hers. "And she is the bravest, most selfless person I have ever known." The court erupted in shocked murmurs. Rysand waited for silence, then spoke directly to Lyanna. "I am not asking you because you owe me. I am not asking because my wolf has chosen you, though it has. I am asking because in 4 weeks you have shown me what it means to be seen, to be valued, to matter." Lyanna's vision blurred. "Will you accept the mate bond?" Rysand asked. "Will you stand beside me, not as my subject, but as my equal? Will you be my queen?" The words hung in the air between them. Lyanna looked at the court, hundreds of nobles who had never seen her before this moment, who would judge her every move, who would question her worth every day. She looked at Kira, standing near the front, her sister's face shining with hope. She looked at Rysand, whose amber eyes held nothing but certainty. "Yes," Lyanna whispered, then louder for the court to hear. "Yes." The throne room exploded with noise, some approving, some shocked, all of it overwhelming. Rysand didn't wait for the court's blessing. He pulled Lyanna close and kissed her forehead, a public claim that said more than words ever could. "Come with me," he murmured. They left through the private entrance behind the throne, guards falling back to give them space. Rysand led her through corridors she'd walked a dozen times as his translator, but everything felt different now. The air hummed with anticipation. He opened the door to his chambers and drew her inside. The room smelled like pine and smoke and him. Lyanna's wolf pressed against her thoughts, restless and eager. Mate, ours. Finally, Rysand closed the door and turned to face her. In private, away from the court's eyes, his composure cracked. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Truly certain. Once the bond is complete, there's no going back." Lyanna stepped closer. "I'm certain I don't want to be whole without you." His breath caught. She reached up and touched his face, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "I've spent my whole life afraid of needing anyone, afraid that if I let myself want something, it would destroy me to lose it." Her hand settled over his heart. "But you make me want to be brave." Rysand caught her hand, pressing it harder against his chest. "I was ready to give up," he whispered. "Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. And then you crashed into my life and made me want to fight again." He cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "You didn't fix me, Lyanna. You made me want to be whole again." The words shattered something inside her. Rysand lowered his forehead to hers. "May I claim you?" "Yes." He kissed her first, slow and deep, and full of every word they hadn't said. Lyanna melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, her wolf singing with desperate joy. When the kiss broke, they were both breathing hard. Rysand's hand slid into her hair, tilting her head to expose her throat. The gesture was intimate, trusting, vulnerable. Lyanna did the same, her fingers threading through his black hair. Their eyes met, held. "Together," Rysand said. "Together." They moved in perfect synchronization, mouths, finding the curve where neck met shoulder, teeth breaking skin with exquisite precision. The taste of copper and magic flooded Liana's senses. The bond snapped into place like lightning through her veins, searing and perfect and overwhelming. Mate. Ours. Home. Ryzen's wolf settled completely, the fractured instability smoothing into absolute peace. Liana's wolf stopped running, finally finding the place it belonged. The claiming bite healed almost instantly, leaving matching marks on both their necks, a visible sign of the invisible bond that now connected them completely. Ryzen pulled back just enough to look at her. I will spend the rest of my life proving you were right to save me. Liana touched the mark on his neck, feeling the bond hum beneath her fingers. You already have. He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent. When he pulled back, there were tears on her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I don't know why Don't apologize. Ryzen wiped her tears with gentle hands. You've spent 10 years alone. You're allowed to cry when you're not anymore. And she did. She cried for every year she'd been invisible, every time she'd made herself small, every moment she'd convinced herself she didn't deserve to be chosen. Rhysand held her through all of it, solid and steady and home. When the tears finally stopped, Liana looked up at him and saw her own wonder reflected back. They were no longer broken, no longer alone, no longer running from the parts of themselves that ached for connection. They were whole. Together. Finally, impossibly, completely whole. 6 months after the claiming, the palace gardens bloomed with summer roses. Liana walked through the festival crowd with Rhysand's hand in hers, their bond humming contentedly between them. The kingdom had gathered to celebrate the anniversary of their union, not because protocol demanded it, but because the people wanted to. Everything had changed. Ryzen's wolf was completely calm. The volatility that had plagued him for 5 years had vanished, replaced by a steady peace that radiated through every decision he made. The court had stopped walking on eggshells. The kingdom had stopped bracing for collapse. And Liana was no longer invisible. She wore a simple gown in deep blue, her hair loose around her shoulders the way Rhysand liked it. The claiming mark on her neck was visible, proud. She'd stopped trying to hide it weeks ago. Your Majesty, a merchant called out, bowing. The displaced persons registry you established has helped my niece find her family. Thank you. Liana smiled. I'm glad. That's what it's for. The program had been her idea. A kingdom-wide effort to reunite families torn apart by war, poverty, and circumstance. She used her translation skills and investigative experience to coordinate searches across 7 kingdoms. In 6 months, they'd reunited 43 families. It would never be enough. But it was something. Kira appeared through the crowd, her arms full of books, her face bright with excitement. Liana, the university accepted my thesis proposal. I start advanced studies in the fall. Liana pulled her sister into a hug. Kira had thrived in the palace, pursuing education with fierce determination, serving as Liana's advisor, building a life she'd never been allowed before. I'm so proud of you, Liana whispered. I learned from the best. Kira squeezed her tight, then disappeared back into the crowd with a wave. Rhysand guided Liana toward a quieter section of the gardens, away from the celebration. They stopped beside a fountain. The same fountain where he'd told her his investigators had found Kira. Where everything had started to change. Are you happy? He asked. The question caught her off guard. Liana looked up at him, this king who had knelt before her, who had asked what she needed instead of demanding what she could give, who had proven every day that love was a choice made over and over. I never knew I was allowed to be, she said honestly. Ryzen pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. And now? Now I am. She touched the claiming mark on his neck, feeling the bond pulse with warmth. I am happy. I am home. I am yours. You saved my life, Ryzen murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. I get to spend the rest of it making sure you never regret it. Liana looked out at the festival, at nobles and servants celebrating together, at Kira laughing with palace scholars, at a kingdom that had accepted her not because of her status, but because she stood beside their king as an equal. She thought about the invisible woman who had arrived at these gates 6 months ago, carrying nothing but a worn bag and a decade of grief. She thought about every choice that had led her here. The poison she'd stopped, the bond she'd run from, the sister she'd chosen, the king who the 500th chosen her back. She smiled and whispered the truest thing she'd ever said. I don't. They stood together in the garden, surrounded by their people, their wolves finally at peace. No longer broken, no longer alone, no longer invisible. Finally, impossibly, completely whole. Thank you so much for listening to Liana and Rizan's story. If you enjoyed their journey from broken strangers to fated mates, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow for more romance stories just like this one. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let yourself be seen. Until next time.